All right. So we are live. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. This is our first book club of the year. Um, I say that like we didn't have one in January, but technically the one in January is the last book of the previous year. So this is actually our real first book of the year. We do these book clubs quarterly. So for quarter one, we always do a modern book, so something that was published in the 21st century. But we actually have 4 quarters in the year, so we've already had the poll up. I'm going to go ahead and mute him real quick there. So I will be announcing our next book club pick tomorrow. It's already been decided by vote in our Facebook group, and I'm really excited to read it. Our second quarter of the year is always a nonfiction book, so it's either an artist biography or something related to art history or media history in general. And then quarter three is a classic, and quarter four is our most popular, which is artistic or creative process, I guess. It's usually a self-help. That is the start of my speech for our book clubs. Just so that everybody knows, we actually have 2 monthly clubs as well. We've already had our discussions for the month, but their new picks will also be announced tomorrow morning. So if you want to find out more about those, you can always join us in our Facebook group. Which also you should be able to find like all of our past picks, all of our new picks, everything that we do for Dragonfly Arts is in the Facebook group, not just the clubs. It's a really awesome group, so check us out over there. And if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, you can support us for as little as sorry, lots of loud sounds happening. As little as $2 a month over on Patreon. I wanted to keep that incredibly short this time because our book club pick of Never Let Me Go is a lot to talk about. So thank you guys for joining me. I can see that there's one person watching. So just so you know, I try to keep these small so that I can maintain all of the discussion. But if you comment on it, we can actually see those comments and we can respond to them live. So if you'd like to join in, join in. I'm also going to put this up front. There are going to be spoilers. That being said, I personally don't think that this book suffers a lot if you do get it spoiled. Like, it has like a pretty big twist that happens like in the first part of it, I guess. Like, but that being said, I don't think having it spoiled for you ever ruins the book. In fact, I think this might be a book that might be more interesting on the second read. But to start the conversation, have you guys read this before it was picked for book club?
Yes.
No.
Have you read anything else by Kazuo Ishiguro?
No, I hadn't even heard of him before this.
Well, this is about probably the 5th time I've read this book, and I've read most of his books.
Would you concur with me that spoiling this book doesn't necessarily take away from it?
No, it's pretty much, it's hinted at very early on, and then it's pretty clear throughout most of the book.
I think it's more like interesting, like you kind of go into this book almost like you already know everything that's going on, but you as the reader are piecing it together based on like little context clues. So the book starts with you essentially assuming you already know everything that's happening in this world. Yeah, I know that you're a fan of Kazuo Ishiguro. Did you like the book?
I did like it. It took me a little while to get into it. I went in totally blind. The only reason why I kind of suspected what the plot twist was going to be was because I had read in like the categories on Amazon or something that it's considered sci-fi or like light sci-fi. So I was like waiting for that to come in, and I was like, oh, with the way they were talking about donations and things like that, I think I know.
What about you, Tim?
Um, I didn't love it. I didn't think Kathy was a very compelling narrator. Um, and it didn't get interesting for me until she and Tommy were roaming the town they were in looking for the cassette tape. And after that, it kind of, with that and beyond that, it engaged me.
That's
But
very late in the book.
yeah, I don't necessarily think I was the audience for this book. It feels like a YA book of sorts to me. Um, I just most of my problem was with the narrator. I just didn't find Kathy very compelling narrator. I found her observations rather mundane and boring, and I think that the characters are far more interesting than the way Kathy narrates them.
Yeah, actually, my take on that is that's kind of the whole point of Cass' character. Um, I was having a discussion with a friend of mine on the book, and this friend was saying that Kath was a very strong character, and I completely disagree. I think she's the weakest character in the book, um, and I think the whole narration is based on her passivity and her willingness to just go along with this whole, just horrible situation. And, you know, um, in the end, the very last line of the book is about her going to do something she was supposed to do. And she just gives over everything about her life to somebody else or to this whole system.
I listened to a lot of interviews from Ishiguro leading up to this discussion because I always interested in like what other people took from the book, and I will be completely upfront. I don't think I necessarily like reading Kazuo Ishiguro. That being said, I also think that like he's one of the best authors like I've ever read. His ability to like have like just such simple language and like convey such very profound things within it. Like it's all very thought provoking. But with every single one of his books, they're kind of melancholic, and I don't like the way that I feel while I'm reading them, and so I kind of like dread picking them up. I've had that for all three of the books that I've read, but I think this was my favorite of the three of his books that I've read. Um, but I also think that that is the point, is the passivity of the characters. Do you think that the book would have been more up to speed if it was like in the voice of a different character?
I don't know. I don't think that Ruth was would be able to be outside of herself enough to tell the story in a compelling fashion. Um, Maybe Tommy, um, but I don't know. I almost think maybe an omniscient narrator might have been a better choice. I think it would be interesting. I think I would love, if it were even possible, I would love to see how Murakami would approach this story, how he would do it, because I have a feeling I would find it more compelling, um, given how he crafts a story compared to the way Ishiguro crafts this one.
I'm trying to figure out how to compare the two because in my brain it's like apples and oranges. Um, but also,
structurally, I think they work in the same fashion. I think structurally you can find some commonalities between the way the two work. But
they're both very go with the vibe, but Ishiguro is a lot more. This feels like it's Kathy's like stream of consciousness almost. Like she opens the book by telling people about her childhood, the people that she's caring for. And the entire book kind of just feels like a story she's telling somebody. And so it does have that kind of go with the flow vibe, where like sometimes she goes off on tangents, and it's very stream of conscious.
Yeah. It has a very conversational quality.
What did you, was there a specific scene or anything that stood out to you guys?
I loved the part where they were in the town looking for the doppelganger, or not doppel, the what do they call it? The person who was
original.
yeah. I thought that scene was really, really well constructed.
I know that Lars is a huge fan of this book, so I really want to know your opinion on it. Just because you've also read it several times over, so I'm sure that you have a lot of opinions on like. It was really interesting for me listening to like Ishiguro talk about the book and his intentions behind going through it, and then like versus like other people talking about it and giving reviews and what they took from it. Was really interesting to me. So I'd love to hear what you guys took from it.
Well, one of the interviews I'd seen with Ishiguro on this book particularly was he often writes about people whose lives are not their own. And certainly remains in the day. You have this butler who dedicates his life to, another person. Clara and the Son sort of takes a different approach to that concept, but there's a similarity to a person who dedicates their life to another person and doesn't really live for themselves. Here, you've got these people who, at first, they kind of believe they're living for themselves. They want to live for themselves, but they're caught up in this society that is raising them to, just spoiler alert, to harvest their organs. And one of the things I noticed in this last time I read it, at the end where they meet with Miss Emily and Madame, and they're trying to get the deferment so that they can live together, so Kath and Tommy can live together for a while before they have to start their donations. One of the things they come into the house, and Miss Emily is saying that, well, I only have a few minutes to talk to you because I've got this piece of furniture that I want to have. I want to get a good price for it, so I want to make sure that the movers don't damage it. And I didn't understand what the point of that was initially. And it's like only this last time I realized Miss Emily and Madame are part of this horrible society that thinks it's okay to use people. And they are trying to be helpful. They're trying to be the best people within that society. But it's like abolitionists during slavery who, were still living their own lives. They were fighting against slavery. They had strong feelings against it, but they were still kind of apart from the slaves. And they still had lives that they wanted to live apart from the slaves. And it's a very separate condition that, Tommy, Ruth, and Kath are living in. And they're really very different kind of lives. I don't know. I think I don't know. That was one thing that kind of hit me this last time around, and it's just there's a kind of hopeless quality where that these people are not going to, be able to escape this situation.
Yeah, it leaves you very bleak at the end. Which I personally don't mind. I kind of enjoy, like, it's realistic. It's not trying to put some kind of like rose-colored glasses over this situation. Like, if this were how society were run, this is just kind of a snapshot of some people's lives who have to exist in this world. It's not about like ending the practice or improving situations for donors or anything like that. But their story still matters.
Mhm.
So thematically, what did you take from it? Is it like the system oppression or something else?
I personally feel like I got that it's kind of a commentary on systems of oppression and how we are all complicit. And even if you have like outliers of people who try to do better and, you know, improve the situation, life still goes on. And those efforts may or may not make an impact.
Tim?
Yeah, one of the things I
Going
noticed, you can tell a story from the outside in, or you can tell it from the inside out. And this is, to me, it's told from the inside out. So it's very, internal to Kath's point of view. Whereas I think at the time that the film was made of this book, there was also a film called The Island, which dealt with kind of a similar idea. And I never saw that one, but it just sort of it kind of made me feel like, okay, here's what happens if you tell the story from the outside, like with the big villains, and there everything is very out there and obvious. Whereas here it's being told from an internal point of view where that person doesn't really understand the outer world and the forces that are working on them. Whereas you could tell the story in a way that you're communicating the forces acting on the characters. Here the characters don't really know what those forces are.
This book, I mean, like Beckett said at the start, it's classified as sci-fi. Do you agree with that?
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
the
think-
only sci-fi aspect is that they're using this cloning technology. That's it.
Which they don't
This is
really
why
explain. So
Mar-
it's not, there's no science in it.
I think
it's either Margaret Atwood or Ursula K. Le Guin who said a better genre name for these kinds of stories is speculative fiction. I think it was Atwood who came up with that idea, because a thing like Handmaid's Tale was classified as science fiction, and speculative fiction is a far more accurate descriptor of this book and that as well.
We talk a lot about genre when we like do our music listening clubs because, as Miguel put it, like the genre listing was just so that they knew where to put it in the music store, and I think that applies to books as well. There's a lot more like generic, I guess, like genres for this, but like you have to know where to put it in the bookstore, and I really hate going to a bookstore and not being able to figure out where the book is. So part of me gets that, but I feel like this book kind of falls into a trap there because it is speculative fiction. And in a lot of the interviews that I listened to with Ishiguro, he actually did a lot of interviews when the movie came out, which the movie came out in 2010, I think. I have a little screenshot from it. So this is Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy.
Well, that's Carey Mulligan. And
It's
is that
Keira Knightley and
Anakin
Andrew
Skywalker
Garfield.
in the end?
No, that's Andrew Garfield.
Oh, I thought it was Ryan. Ryan, isn't Ryan? Ryan Phillippe was Anakin, right? Was that Ryan, or was that somebody else? Who played Anakin in the Star Wars movies? That's who I thought that was.
In the prequels, Hayden Christensen.
Hayden Christensen. That's who I
couldn't figure out the order of Hayden and Christian in my head. I was like, it's somewhere around there.
Christian Haydenson.
Yeah.
Hayden Christensen. Haydenson.
But the movie came out in 2010, and the book came out in 2001, I want to say. I could probably look. I have it literally right in front of me, so I could easily open at a couple of pages. This says copyright 2005.
Yeah.
But I think in 2008, Hunger Games was released, and that really changed the dystopian kind of novel. And this book, despite the fact that it's very speculative fiction, and I would probably classify it and put it into fiction before I put it into sci-fi or anything else, this is a dystopia for the people. This is their dystopia. And I guess when he was on that tour, the most common question that he got asked was, why didn't they fight back? And people are coming from, this series of dystopian young adult books that were all about fighting against these unjust systems. And this book is more about like what happens when people just kind of live in it and they don't even know the boundaries to push. This is just a story that takes place inside of them. And Ishiguro himself has said that when he started this book, he wanted to write about mortality and the way that humans interact with both mortality and with each other, knowing that their lives will end. And the sci-fi dystopian aspect of it was built around that. So from his perspective, this is a book that's entirely about mortality. And this was the best scenario that he could come up with to put the characters in a spot where they had to come to terms with that and also come to terms with each other. I mean, they grew up as clones within like Hailsham. Hailsham? I always said Hailsham in my head, but then I listened to a bunch of interviews and everybody said Hailsham. So it's a book. Who knows how it's pronounced? I watched the movie and I don't remember how they pronounced it in the movie. I got so confused. But they are their only family. They are the people who know each other. And I mean, this group of three kind of also moved on to the next stage where they went to the cottages is where they went after the fact. And they were the only ones that knew each other from childhood. So this group of three is kind of this weird mismatched love triangle that are just the people that they knew.
Does Andrew Garfield play Tommy?
Yeah.
That's not how I pictured Tommy at all. That is
Keira Knightley. Yeah, Keira Knightley is Ruth. And Carey Mulligan was Kath.
That's not Keira Knightley.
That is Keira Knightley.
That's Keira Knightley.
Really?
Yeah.
Isn't she older than that?
No.
This came out in 2010? Yeah. No.
I think it's the aggressive bangs that
maybe
doesn't
look like Keira Knightley.
Makes her a little hard to replace.
So yeah, it is. But it was also really interesting to listen to. Like I listened to a lot of YouTube reviews of this, and everybody took an entirely different meaning from it. And Ishiguro was like, I love hearing everybody's different meanings. Like his meaning was he wanted this book to portray mortality. And a lot of his books kind of deal with that, like relationships within a constraint and also just accepting what is in front of you. I think he has a huge interest in why people accept things. And I think a lot of books, especially like newer books and books that you read, are used to people trying to break out of constraints, which is why this book kind of feels a little bit hard at times. I definitely don't think it reads like young adult. I read a lot of young adult. So I think I would disagree. He definitely writes in a more simple manner, but I think that's it feels like a trap. The simple writing is like a trap.
I got young adult from it just because I think young adults would identify and understand these characters better than me as a something year old man, coming from the generation that I come from. But I guess Lars gets it. So, I don't know. I just took it I decided that young adult was a good place to put it just because I felt that young adults would understand these characters and empathize.
Well, and the characters don't live past young adulthood, so.
Yeah. I think for me,
maybe. Go ahead, Lars.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I think sort of the entry point for me and why the book grabbed me and sort of pulled me in was, I had this sense of, the isolation that these kids are growing up in from the world. They live in this very isolated, insulated kind of, boarding school. And while that's nothing like, I just went to standard public school or whatever, but um, I always very much kept to myself, um, and still do. And I think that kind of sense of being separated from the wider world uh, sort of had a resonance to me personally, and so I could really identify with how they were interacting with life, and and I guess to a certain extent, I'm a bit of a bleak, melancholy person anyway, and tend to see the world as rather hopeless. Um, and so for me, it kind of felt natural. It felt like, okay, yeah, this is what the world looks like to me. And so I think I keep going back and reading the book because it depicts the world in a way that makes sense to me, and feels right.
Interesting.
I mean, I do. That's why I think I said that it feels more realistic, the way that the characters react and the way that things pan out, because like the world is hopeless. A lot of stuff goes wrong all the time, and a lot of people suffer for it. We tend, especially as Western audiences, like to consume media that has a brighter outlook on life, but life is life. It's not always going to go that way.
I think the most interesting thing about the setup, where there's so much potential, because I don't think those kinds of stories get told, is that these children are born into their oppression, and they are so isolated from the world that they don't realize that they're oppressed. They're like, oh, well, this is just how, we as a group, our group, this is how our lives are supposed to be. So they don't even know. There's nobody except for, the teachers, whose jobs depend on them not revealing too much. There's nobody to tell them that, that there's that this is not right. And I was thinking about what I said when you asked me about who would be a more interesting storyteller. And I was looking at the character list. And I think Miss Lucy would have been a very interesting narrator to tell this story.
Speaking of Miss Lucy, I think the next question that I had, and I was trying to think of a segue to it, was I feel like there's a huge difference to be talked about between Miss Emily, who kind of keeps away from the students, and ultimately, like, it feels like her goal is to make sure that they know as little as possible, versus Miss Lucy that thinks they should know the truth from the beginning. Do you lean one way or the other?
Well, I think it would be a very different story. Like I feel like talking about like oppression and why don't people fight back, or why do people become complicit in these systems, like the rising up from oppression narrative would have been more effective had it come through the other side, the kids who don't get to go to Helsham, the kids who get abused in the other homes that we don't know precisely what they go through, but it's alluded to that they're treated very poorly. So, that would be an entirely different story, but I could see more uprising coming out through that lens versus these kids growing up a pretty comfortable life, just kind of indoctrinated into this is just the way things are. And they have no reference of comparison that it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think that if you were to tell the story from Miss Lucy's perspective, that would be more telling the story from the outside in, as I sort of was saying earlier. And I think it gives sort of the outer perspective of that world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't really know what happened to Miss Lucy after she left. She just couldn't deal with it and just bailed.
Well, no, they fired her.
Yeah. For talking too much.
Yeah.
It's actually like I feel like it was kind of left like I wasn't exactly sure whether she was fired or whether she
From
just
Miss
left to her own
Emily's
live.
from their discussion with Miss Emily at the end,
Yeah.
I gathered that they let her go because she was getting too uppity.
Yeah, I don't
She had too
remember the
many
exact line.
ideas.
You know, I'm still thinking about my difficulty with the book, and I wonder if, you know, I'm still slogging my way through Martin Amos's The Zone of Interest, not because it's badly written, but because it's a lot of it is a tough read. But that story is told from the perspective of three different narrators in an alternating pattern. It's one narrator, then the other, then the other, then he goes back to the first narrator and just goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 throughout the book. And I think this book would have been more interesting for me if that had been, you know, if Ishiguro had chosen to use Kathy and then maybe Miss Lucy and then maybe Ruth, those might be three different perspectives that would um, give us a fuller picture of the world within this school.
Maybe. I do think Miss Lucy would have been an interesting perspective to see through. But at the same time, like Lars was saying, it would give an outsider's perspective. So it wouldn't have that feeling of centeredness. This is the world. This is how things are. This is what we do. And, there's nothing to be done about it.
So what about Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy as narrators?
I don't like Ruth.
You're not supposed to like Ruth.
Yeah, I think Tommy would have been good to hear from, though.
Well, I think it's interesting because the three characters, you have Kath, who is very passive and basically just going through life, basically saying, what am I supposed to do? Okay, I'll do that. You have Ruth, who is very much using fantasy as a way of dealing with reality. And she comes up with these scenarios that are, or she'll create drama, or she'll do various things that sort of allow her to escape actually having to face the reality that they're living in. And
Yeah.
Tommy is a little bit closed off, but the thing that I found interesting is like when they're leaving Miss Emily and Madame's place, and I think Tommy just says stop the car, and he gets out and he just goes out in the field and starts screaming and just raging the way he did as a child. And in a way, I sort of see Tommy as the only person who really was angry and fighting against this of the three of them. But even he didn't really understand what was going on until the end, to realize that, oh, there could have been this whole different life. Because even Kath sort of, when Ruth finally says, yes, you two should actually be together, Kath and Tommy should be together. Kath's reaction is, it's too late, and she gets angry, and then they do. Kath and Tommy do try to have a relationship, and it does work to some extent, but it's. I think a lot of it, this idea of mortality, is like, how do you live your life knowing that you don't have much life to live?
It's really interesting when you said that because this is what like kind of sparked in my brain was the fact that like yeah, Ruth and Tommy shouldn't have been together this whole time, but they were, and it kind of like is implied throughout the book that whoever is together for the entirety of the time. Like there's not a whole lot of like, well, for the next person, there's not a lot of for the next thing, there's not a lot of future thinking amongst them
Because they have no future.
and they like know that intrinsically, even I feel like before they've rationalized it. But it was just like an interesting thing that like all of them kind of do, where there's like multiple bad kind of relationships that are happening, and they're just like, nope, that's just it.
Yeah.
So it is kind of an interesting take on mortality and accepting life as it is in front of you when you know that there's so little of it left, of just dealing with the lot you were dealt. Like you just deal with it, which is a lot of this book. I also wanted to talk about the title, Never Let Me Go. And why do you guys think that it was named that? Why did he focus on this one specific song?
I think it's uh the word is escaping me, but like
Metaphor?
what?
Metaphor?
No.
No.
It's like somebody else go. I can't think of it.
Well, it's interesting. I just before this, I was listening to a couple versions of the song "Never Let Me Go." Oh, do you go ahead?
I got it. I remembered. It's a lament for
Yeah.
the lives that they are never going to be able to live.
Yeah.
That's it.
But with regard to the title of the song or the title of the book, actually, I was listening to a couple versions of the song, and I just cannot get into the song. It's like it's okay, but I'm having a hard time understanding the book from the standpoint of the lyrics of that song. But the title itself, um, I guess the way I see it, and I think that's kind of a simplistic way of seeing it, but it's just um, they don't have much to hold on to. So they're just trying to hold on to each other.
Yeah.
And that's about all they've got.
I think that's what it's more about versus the song itself. Because I mean, they even say like the stuff that they get at these exchanges are rejected, things from the outside world. So like it's not that it's like a good song or a memorable song, or it's just the song that she had.
Yeah.
As far as the title goes, it's actually based on a Bill Evans song that Ishiguro had never heard. He just saw the title on the back. What?
Which song?
Never Let Me Go.
I didn't know. I don't recall Bill Evans recording a song called Never Let Me Go.
Yeah.
I've got a version by Keith Jarrett, but that's just an instrumental version.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, because when they made the movie, they had to record a version of the song that had lyrics in it. But Ishiguro had never heard the song. The song doesn't have lyrics. It's just a piano song. He has said that he has decided to learn the song and can now play it on piano, which I think is kind of funny. But a lot of what he said is he was really drawn to this phrase because it's just such an unreasonable request. You can't never let something go. That you don't have the time for it. It's just a completely ridiculous thing that you can ask of somebody, which is why he was drawn to it.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I hadn't really thought about it from that perspective.
The more, like, as soon as he said it, I was like, you're right. That is a ridiculous thing to say to somebody.
Yeah. Well, and even more so for these kids who aren't going to live beyond 20.
And I mean, she also never lets the song go. It went missing. They never really talk about how it could have gone missing, just that they were able to find it again. And she treasured this item that, again, was kind of a reject from normal society. And on that note, and this is something that I wrote down multiple times in my notes because I was like, we have to talk about this. They put a lot of like emphasis on their collections. And I really want to talk. I mean, we're an arts group, we're a group of creatives. And especially at Hailsham, like art is so heavily the focus. It's like they spend all of their time doing art. People make fun of Tommy for being bad at art. It's kind of a meritocracy of like art. And kind of interesting. So, how did you guys feel about like art's importance in?
Yeah. Well, I feel like that part of it is very well explained at the end, and something that we've talked about in our regular support calls pretty consistently is how art is an expression of yourself. Art is, an extension of your soul as a person. So like the teacher's whole conceit about using the art that these kids make to show the world that they are people, and they do, have value and have souls. Um, yeah.
Which ultimately it seems like the world doesn't care about.
Well,
Well, that actually seems pretty much like how art is seen in the world.
That's kind of what it's like being an artist, I guess.
it's kind of what it's like being human.
Mhm.
But they put such a pressure on it, but also they do. It's like so central to their life, and they believe that it's going to save them. Like if they have a good enough amount of skill, then it will
I
save them. But
really,
also they treasure everything that they get from
from each
other
other,
people. Yeah.
I really, really, really want to see some of Tommy's micro animal drawings. Those sounded so cool. Anyone else thoughts?
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't know, I
trying to
guess
leave space because I feel like sometimes I just like because I write down all of my thoughts beforehand so that I can help like move the discussion to different places. So a lot of times I feel like I'm just reading my notes that I've already like thought about, and like I really want other people's thoughts. So
yeah, I think the need for art, it is interesting because that was something I always had a difficulty understanding. It's like, why was art so important? Um, and ultimately, they go trying to get the deferment, and turns out the art really didn't mean a whole lot at all. And I guess the one thing that the art did was it kept them human. It kept them alive and moving forward. Whereas if you think about these kids growing up in another school or another place where they're just cattle or whatever, or chattel, I don't know. You know, there would have been no concern for their lives as human beings. Whereas here, the art is the thing that keeps them interested in life and hopeful. I guess art gives you hope. Art constructs hope to a certain extent, and maybe it was a bad thing to give these kids hope.
I mean, they talk about how like they're used to having like 4 couples a year come to try and like get deferrals based on like art in the
Mm-hmm.
past. Um, but there's also like people view kids that went to Hailsham as like a superior crowd almost. Like when they go to the cottages, like everybody is like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh my God, you're from Hailsham."
And also a bit elitist.
Yeah.
Yeah, it begs the question, what goes on at these other facilities?
Yeah, you never find out. But I kind of always like felt like they didn't just make art all the time. Maybe they did because like nobody really discusses otherwise, so we don't really know. And like when they hit the cottages, they don't really like they're kind of like rebelling against it. Like they don't really seem to make art anymore. It's like
Except
their
for
new,
Tommy.
yeah. Tommy only started making art. um, but there's also like a really interesting thing when they go to Norfolk, then they're like looking for the original. There is a word for it, and I don't remember what it is, but which seems ridiculous because they say it like every single
Yeah, I don't
sentence.
remember. I finished this book a while ago. I don't remember.
Um,
Lars, you've read it many times. What do they call the template person?
Uh, yeah, I don't remember.
we've all forgotten.
Uh,
um,
it's I want to
But
say they're saying it's their original, but that's not right.
no, it like
Pretty
begins
sure.
with a P.
Yeah.
I don't know why I specifically know. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But while they're in Norfolk, they actually follow her into an art gallery and become like obsessed with the art there.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's like them comparing their like lives to it, but they're also with Chrissy and Rodney, who didn't grow up at Hailsham. And they're still like drawn to this art, like they forgot what their purpose was while they were there.
Well, it seems like within the other like institutions where clones are raised, that Hailsham is kind of infamous for producing artists, because that's what they talk about. With, like, you guys could get a deferral based on, you know.
Right. Well, they don't say that. They just say there's a deferral if you are in love with each
Oh,
other.
that's right. That's right.
Yes, Tim?
I found the word. I scanned the Wikipedia entry really quick. Possible.
Ah,
Yeah.
Possible.
I was scanning the book, but not doing a great job because there's a lot of pages. Less pages than most books, though. It's actually a fairly short book. It's under 300, just barely, but
I really thought it was going to be a fast read because it was so relatively short, and it was a struggle for me.
Oh my
It
gosh,
is a
I finished
fast
it so
read.
quickly. Yeah, I also really enjoyed kind of what I liked about Ishiguro's writing style is that I found myself always trying to solve the mystery. Like, he would mention things here and there without fully explain. Like, he tells the story as if the reader knows everything about the history of what's going on. And so there are constantly like references to things that you haven't learned yet. And I just couldn't stop reading because I was like, what is this? What does it mean? I had to know. And I found it really fascinating digging into Kath's obsession with looking at porn because she thought her template was possibly like her possible template person was possibly like somebody in the sex industry.
because she got horny sometimes and nobody talked about that, which is bonkers to me. That a bunch of kids that were kind of just left on their own just didn't just talk about it. Because I view that as something that is kind of shameful from like a society standpoint, but not necessarily something that like you intrinsically know is shameful. So it's really interesting to me that they know that. I guess it's because the Kefers dude views it as shameful.
Well, and they also talked a lot about sex, but
Mhm.
not about like desire.
And in fact, Ruth at some point in time was like, Tommy's not going to like you because you've been with other people. So like there's a weird stigma about it that like it feels weird that they would have. I do want to go back to this image really quickly. Because this is one of my favorite scenes where they're like in a diner and essentially interacting with people for the first time that weren't a part of the system. So it's just them at a diner trying to figure out how to order and doing a terrible job because all they've done is like weird classes where like they had to role play. And that's a really funny thing for me to think about is like, oh no, they never left this. And they never met people that weren't already into what they had. Like, so this is our first time meeting people who didn't think about them.
It's interesting that you bring that up because it just reminds me of when I got into college, I met some friends and I started hanging out with them. And one of the difficulties I ran into was learning how to eat at a restaurant. I was so incredibly awkward. And you're mentioning this scene, just it's like, yeah, that was how I responded to dealing with people outside of the life I sort of lived, which was kind of insular, I suppose. Um, and yeah, I know I just hadn't thought about that, but yeah, there's elements where my experience with interacting outside of, say, my family was a bit like how these people would have to interact with the rest of humanity.
I had a similar experience where I had a really strange childhood, and the only people I talked to throughout my childhood were people who were experiencing the same strange childhood.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I was in college that I realized that my childhood was strange. um, so it's kind of a similar experience. I did go to like restaurants, and I knew how to order in a restaurant, but like people would say things to me and like I wouldn't get it. Or I'd say something and no one would understand me. And it was a weird experience of like coming to terms with the fact that like your experiences were not shared by everybody else for the first time.
Yeah.
So I can totally relate to that.
I feel like that to some extent is an experience that everyone has, because
I
as
think
a
so.
kid, you don't know anything outside of your own experience and perspective.
Yeah, the only people you know are the people you really interact with every day. It's the kids
Yeah.
from the playground that you went to, and everybody knows that playground. And then all of a sudden you meet people who have never seen that playground before.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, you guys didn't have that weird twirly fireman's pole? You don't know what that is?
Wait, your childhood wasn't exactly like mine? Yeah. Some people grow out of that insulary perspective. Some people don't.
My brother was very, very social and never had that awkward time frame. So, and I shared my childhood with that guy. Entirely different experiences. We are coming up on an hour here, so I want to know if anybody had any final thoughts or things that they really wanted to discuss. Things that we haven't talked about that are just really on your mind.
I had a thought that this, at least the beginning when they're at Hailsham, reminded me a lot of this manga / anime that I like. That's kind of, it's a similar conceit where the kids are raised apart from the outside world, but it's in order to sacrifice them to demons.
Yeah, Promise Neverland.
Yes.
Great first season. Terrible second season.
The second season was a little off.
Yeah. Interesting story behind that. We'll talk about it later. Highly recommend the first season. Do not recommend the second season at all. Yeah, it's kind of, childhoods are weird, man.
I mean, the whole like construct of being a child is weird. Like, you know, you're in this phase of life where you can't care for yourself whatsoever, so you depend on everyone and everything around you. But at the same time, you don't think about any of that. You're just kind of in your own little child world.
Yeah.
Tim, are we putting you to sleep?
No, not at all.
Tim didn't like the book, so he's just listening to us and trying to figure it out.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I didn't hate the book. I just
Like I said earlier, it's one of those weird experiences for me where I think Kazuo Ishiguro is an incredible writer. I think that this is an incredibly good book. It is superbly well crafted. It is like pretty high up there on like caliber of books I've read. I did not enjoy reading it, and I probably will not pick up another Kazuo Ishiguro. I've tried 3 of his books. I don't enjoy the process of reading them. So
try The Unconsoled.
Okay.
That will drive you totally insane.
I have a list of his, because they released the 20th anniversary of Never Let Me Go along with when he released Clara and the Sun, which was his most recent book.
I loved Remains of the Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I also didn't like The Remains of the Day, and I had like a so-so experience with Clara and the Sun, so I think I'm just not. It's such a weird experience to watch something and be like, I did not enjoy this, but this was incredibly well done. Like it's
I-
such like a very specific feeling that I get sometimes because I consume a lot of media, and it's
Yeah, I'm really
ridiculous.
curious about his writing process because just all of the disparate threads that you have no idea, like I was mentioning before, where they go or how they connect, and then they all come together at the end. I'm like, how? How do you keep track of that? That would drive me insane.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed that I really just love about what he does in the writing is his endings. Very often are just extremely carefully distilled. Like the ending of this, probably, as far as I'm concerned, is the most perfect one he's done, where Kath is sort of at this, there's a tree and there's some barbed wire and there's just some litter sort of collecting, um, blown by the wind. And she's thinking about Tommy after he's gone. And she's crying briefly, just thinking about him. And then the line is, she says, I wasn't sobbing or out of control. I just waited a bit, then turned back to the car to drive off to wherever it was I was supposed to be. And it perfectly sums up the passivity of her character and how she's just doing what she's told. And it's sort of a devastating ending. And I think Barry Giant and Clara and the Sun and Remains of the Day all have endings that are kind of like that, that just perfectly sort of condense everything about the book in like one paragraph.
He didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature for no reason.
Yeah,
He's,
he's a decent writer.
he's all right. He's okay. Any final thoughts before we end our stream for the night? Here's a picture of the man,
Aw.
so everybody can know what Kazuo Ishiguro looks like.
Just my last thought, because this takes place in England. Was he raised in England?
Yes.
Yes,
He
he's
was
British.
born in Japan and moved to England when he was 5. So unless we have any final thoughts, I'm going to go ahead and end our stream for the night. So thank you guys for joining me. Thank you all for reading the book and sharing your thoughts. And I will catch you all in the next one.
Well, thank you.
Bye, everyone.